Hello and welcome to Iowa Talking Points. I'm Jeff Stein from News Talk 1540 KXEL. Thank you for joining us for another in this series of conversations concerning issues of interest to Americans generally and Iowans in particular. This program was produced in the afternoon of Thursday, October 26, 2023, within Studio 5 at Mudd Advertising in Cedar Falls. And we welcome to Iowa Talking Points Republican presidential candidate and former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. Now, his career in public service is lengthy and varied. President Ronald Reagan appointed him as the youngest U.S. attorney in the nation for the Western District of Arkansas. Later in 1996, he won the first of 3 consecutive terms in the U.S. House from his home state. During his third term in Congress, President George W. Bush appointed Asa Hutchinson to serve as administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration and later as the nation's first Undersecretary of Homeland Security for Border Protection. He was elected governor of Arkansas in 2014 and re-elected 4 years later with 65% of the vote. That's more than any other Republican candidate for governor in that state's history. He concluded his term in office earlier this year. Hutchinson holds degrees from Bob Jones University and the University of Arkansas School of Law. He and his wife Susan have been married for more than 50 years and have 4 children and 7 grandchildren. Welcome to Governor Asa Hutchinson. Now, the format of our program is quite simple, a conversation about some of the key topics of interest to you, the voters. And I'll be joined in the questioning this afternoon by former Iowa State Representative Jon Jacobsen. And Jon, welcome. All right, Governor, let us begin. This is no small undertaking. You have had a varied career, a stellar career of public service. Why run for president in 2024?
Well, you're right. This is a huge undertaking, and people rightfully describe me as an underdog whenever you're looking at the strength of our front runner. But I'm in the race because you recited my background. My experiences in life are what our country needs. You know, from my time as head of the DEA in the fentanyl crisis that we have, to experience as governor and leading a state and balancing the budget for 8 years in a row. To my foreign policy experience, setting up the first visa security office in Saudi Arabia after the 9/11 attack on our country, and serving in Congress, on and on. You're looking at the border security challenges that we face. That was my responsibility during the Bush administration. So I understand what needs to be done in this country, and I'm running for president because I believe in our future. I believe that we have to secure our border, we have to produce energy in our country, and that we have to lead. And so that's the America that I love, and that's the America that I want to make sure my grandchildren enjoy as well.
You and I have spoken on the radio on KXEL a trio of times now, and the news of the day has been different each of those times. So it brings up the broad question: what leadership skills are necessary for the next president of the United States to hold? And how does your skill set, your demeanor, your abilities, how does that dovetail with the skill set needed?
Great question. And first of all, we need a president in terms of leadership that brings out the best of America. You know, I come from Bentonville, Arkansas, the international home of Walmart, and I started practicing law in the square of Bentonville when Sam Walton was there setting up his first stores. And Sam Walton led by bringing out the best of his employees. That's what good leaders do. We need a president that brings out the best of America. And you do that by appealing to our best instincts and character, and not appealing to what divides us or bringing out our worst instincts. So that's part of leadership. Secondly, you know, you want to be able to listen. You want to have a leader that has a sense of humility and a sense of strength. America needs to demonstrate strength across the globe, because if you don't have strength, it invites aggression by our adversaries, and we've seen that. But at the same time of demonstrating strength, you know, our leaders in the past, from Abraham Lincoln to George Washington, have demonstrated a humility in which we don't have all the answers, and we seek to divine providence, as they would say. We seek God's guidance in our decisions. And that sense of humility is important for a leader, particularly of America. And then, I like Iowans because they look at me and they say, you seem just like us. You seem normal, and we need normal leadership. We need normal leadership that does extraordinary things and can lead in extraordinary ways. That's, I hope, the leadership that I have demonstrated in my career, and that's what America needs today.
You mentioned that you grew up near Bentonville. You actually grew up on a farm, and so that puts you on a par with many of the folks who will show up to caucus on January 15th.
That's right. I was in 4-H. I was in 4-H in Gravette, Arkansas. My mom and dad, my dad was a poultry farmer, cattle farmer, and we had some commodity crops, but I learned to work hard, clean out chicken houses, and I also understood the importance of family and community and faith. That's what you learn growing up on a farm. And so I have that background of hard work, working in factories. I remember whenever my wife and I were living in a double-wide mobile home, I was bringing home a check, but it was one that was causing us to live paycheck to paycheck. And I saw her digging through the sofas looking for coins. I said, "What are you doing?" She says, "I'm going to the grocery store trying to get some money." And so I understand the hardships that we go through today, and that we've got to be careful about how we spend money in government, just like you learn on the farm.
Let's talk about some broad issues, and let's begin with national security. Because again, you were in the George W. Bush administration at a key time in the history of this nation, the beginnings of the Homeland Security Office. What does that experience give you in terms of the insight and ability to lead the nation and arguably the world through this next phase that apparently is ramping up in terms of terror and uncertainty?
Well, there are a lot of comparisons to where we are today versus post 9/11 environment after we had the incredible attack on the World Trade Center, lost 3,000 Americans. And what I saw as President Bush asked me to help set up the new Department of Homeland Security, which is the largest government reorganization since the Pentagon was created. 180,000 people coming in from 22 different agencies to set up this new department that was designed to protect Americans from a terrorist attack, and that was ultimately my responsibility. But what I saw was that the world came together in support of the United States after the attack by terrorists, and Europe joined with us, and Asian countries joined with us. And what's surprising to me is after the brutal attack of Hamas on Israel, the world seemed somewhat divided. And that's startling to me, and that's not a good sign whenever you see some countries pulling back and not condemning the attack on Hamas. And so what I learned after 9/11 was that we have to be diligent in protecting the United States of America, and that's why securing our border is critically important. That was my responsibility during the Bush administration. But I also understand that when you protect our border, it actually starts overseas. So I set up our first visa security office in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh. I went there myself. We had to work out agreements with the European Commission. We had to build support there. That was my responsibility. And so we took the steps necessary to protect the United States of America as we took the fight to the enemy in the global war on terrorism. I was right there at the time, and it's an extraordinary experience for me to grow up on a farm and then be in the Situation Room with the President of the United States, listening to the latest terrorist threats and knowing I had a job to do to protect America.
There is something about that again, as you were in that moment, and some of us have experienced similar situations where you realize where you are and you think immediately of where you came from. Yeah. I may not have been grammatically expressed as well as some English teachers might have liked, but the concept is that it really gives you a sense of purpose and grounding, does it not, in terms of then carrying out the task that's necessary?
Absolutely. Whenever you look at the challenges that we face in America, when your foundations shake, you go back to your roots, and that's what strengthens you. It's your faith. It's what you learned in fundamental values, and that's important for America. Whether it's the basics in education or the basics in leadership and governance. And it's also a humbling thing to recognize whenever you have great opportunity, great responsibility goes with that. And that public servants are about the public good, the common good, and not about whether, what some leader did offended you or made me look bad. It's about America. It's about our future. It's about our strength and our security.
You mentioned a moment ago that when Hamas attacked Israel in early October, there was a division among the voices of world leaders, nations of the world, etc. There was a division on our home front and within our U.S. Congress, which again, should that cause us to pause for a moment and take stock?
Well, it should, and by and large, America is united in support of Israel. Now, what is troublesome is you look at our college campuses, and our university presidents have not been clear in their condemnation of Hamas and the atrocity that they convened, and that actually endangers our Jewish students on those campuses. And so it's right to call them out. We can do better here in America, but by and large, there is that kind of support for Israel because we're linked. Their national security is important for our national security. I want to add one thing, sure, just in terms of my thought. Whenever I saw those settlements being attacked and the recordings of those attacks, that they went in, Hamas did, to a safe room, used a grenade to blow down the door. And you have a family huddled in there with their children, and the dad has no weapon to grab to protect the family. Let me tell you, I just thought I'm grateful for the Second Amendment here in America, and it stresses to me the importance of the ability to protect a family. And that, thank goodness, in our bomb shelters here, we've got something to protect our family.
But we need that protection because increasingly even the American mainland potentially is under attack from within because of the inability of this administration to identify who has been coming here over the past 3 years.
President Biden has failed our country in terms of border security. He gets an F. In terms of energy security, he has not had the right policies. He's given us a all-green policy of energy that left him having to go to Saudi Arabia and say, please, can you produce more oil? Whenever you look at his spending in Washington, D.C., it's given us the inflation and the interest rates that we have today. And so start with the fundamentals, and that is our border security. And I've been there. It wasn't perfect, but I know what needs to be done. And if you want to secure the border, put somebody who has that experience in charge, and also who understands from a rule of law perspective. And I was a federal prosecutor. I was head of the DEA. I believe in enforcing the rule of law. And that's the fundamental part of being a border security and being a sovereign nation is protecting that border. So it's a threat to us, and we've got to do better. We have to do it with resources, building infrastructure, reforming our asylum laws, and going after the cartel in Mexico. That's exactly the kind of teamwork that has to be done to be successful.
I'll bring Jon into the conversation in a moment, but you mentioned energy. Let's talk about President Hutchinson's energy policy writ large.
Well, first of all, we got to produce energy. You think about the heat wave we had this last summer. thank goodness for air conditioning. It takes energy to produce that cool, and that's a quality of life issue. And it's also a safety issue for, the families that are, might just have fans. I mean, so it is a safety issue. But we have to produce energy both for our quality of life, but also for our economic growth and vitality. President Biden went all green, and then he ran into problems with that, and then he tried to renew leases, and then he canceled leases. So it's just a confusing policy that he's had that's left our energy producers with uncertainty as to whether they should invest in more production or not. As President of the United States, I will first reopen some of our federal lands to leasing. President Biden canceled them on the Alaskan slope. These were leases that are already issued. We're going to reissue those. We want that kind of production. Secondly, here in Iowa, the ethanol production. That's an important part of our energy mix. In Arkansas, it's hydropower, it's nuclear power, it is solar power. And we need to use all those sources of energy, not to reduce them, but to expand those opportunities. And so I believe in the diversity of energy production, and you'll see me as a supporter of our biofuels industry here in Iowa as president.
Jon Jacobsen, former Iowa State Representative.
Hello, Governor. Great to have you back in Iowa. As a Western Iowan, you've been out in our neck of the woods. Great to see you again. As a successful governor, you've had to balance budgets. I'd like to turn specifically to domestic economic policy. Right now, despite what the media says based on inflation numbers that are a jury-rigged formula compared to how they were computed in the 80s with the Carter double-digit inflation, we still have de facto double-digit inflation. They're removing energy and food from core inflation, but when you add those back in, we're at double-digit inflation. We spent trillions of dollars such that we're not quite Argentina yet, but we're looking at a hyperinflation environment that has nearly panicked the Fed into a 650 basis point increase in less than 2 years. The whipsaw of that is now we're seeing mortgage interest rates at 8%. Families cannot afford what used to be a $300,000 home at 3% and maybe $100,000 of interest payment. Now they're looking at paying $750,000 for a $300,000 house, and a government that might not even be able to service the debt payment based on the interest due and owing. The Fed is in a conundrum. The Congress continues to work from continuing resolution to continuing resolution. Let's fast forward, Governor, to January of 2025. What does President Hutchinson do to abate what looks to be the specter of a looming Great Recession, if not potential depression?
Thank you, John. And first, you set the stage very well, but let's put it into our Iowa families. As I talk around this state, and moms come up and they're talking about the price of milk in the store. They're talking about how to stretch the paycheck or working an extra job to make ends meet. This is a real struggle for our families. And it's the cost of inflation that has eroded their paycheck, and now you get hit with higher interest rates that raises their credit card debt, that makes it more difficult to buy a new car, or as you said, to get into a new home. My son's can't get into a home as his family expands because you can't afford to move, and with the higher interest rates. So as president, on my early days in office, I'm going to first start controlling the federal spending. I'm going to get our economy moving again, and with one fundamental principle. I want the private sector of our economy to grow faster than the government sector. And to do that, I will put a hiring freeze in place for non-defense workers in the federal government. I did that as governor. We reduced state government employment by over 3,000 workers while I was governor. That's a 14% reduction. We will reduce it by 10%, 200,000 workers out of the federal government. And that sends a signal we're going to control federal spending. Secondly, it is about our energy production because that hits us at the pump. If we don't have sufficient energy production, the price at the pump goes up. That hurts our families. we're going to send the signal from day one, we're going to open up more energy supplies, more production here in the United States. And so those are a couple things that are very specific. You've got to control that federal spending. I'm going to have and I know we have senior citizens that listen that are on Social Security. I'll have a commission on the future of Social Security and Medicare that will strengthen those programs, but also make them solvent for our future. Those are things that need to be done on day one as you look at what has to be done for our economy.
Governor Hutchinson, you were a medical freedom governor during the COVID pandemic. A lot of my constituents were reeling during that pandemic. Some of them were threatened with jobs and lost their jobs for not taking the Myrna injection. Some got ill because they were forced to take the Myrna injection. We had, even in Iowa, businesses that were shut down, churches that were shut down. I've got constituents who now have cardio adverse effects from the Myrna, women with reproductive organ adverse effects from the Myrna. We also see that some of our folks, I would tell you, I had physicians weeping on the phone because they were using what now has been borne out to be very efficacious treatments, using ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, some of them with 100% efficacy, not having their prescriptions filled by pharmacists, losing some of their patients. In Nebraska, our neighboring state, they had a better per capita per case record in saving COVID lives than Iowa did, because their Attorney General in Nebraska, Doug Peterson, wrote a legal opinion saying, call off the dogs, don't go after these doctors. Yet in Iowa, our Board of Medicine and Board of Pharmacy targeted these courageous doctors of conscience for punitive action, while the hospitals were using flawed remdesivir and ventilators, which had such a bad track record. Now we're talking again about ramping up. Just yesterday, the Texas Republican speaker wants to still put into place Myrna vaccine mandates for employees. What does a Hutchinson administration do to rebalance the constitutional rights of Iowans?
Well, as president, there will not be any mandate for government employees to take a vaccine related to COVID. Secondly, whenever you look at the military, those that were discharged ought to be reinstated. We need those personnel in the military. And so those are clear directions that I would take as president. As governor, you can see it, we didn't have any government mandates for the vaccine. We made sure that we lifted the burdens on businesses. I didn't distinguish between an essential business and a non-essential business. I said every business that provides a job for a family is essential, and we kept those open. And then when it came to our schools, you know, we had a lot of pressure to close our schools. And that first spring in 2020, everyone went virtual. I said, this is not going to work in a rural state. And I said, we're going to open the schools for in-classroom instruction. And we did that despite all the pressure against it. And the result is that Arkansas ranked number 2 in the nation in terms of days of in-classroom instruction during the pandemic. That's freedom, but that's also responsible leadership, understanding the importance for our school children. You know, and we've learned a lot of lessons through that pandemic. A lot of challenges. I don't try to say that everything I did was perfect, but I communicated honestly with the people of Arkansas as to what we're going through, what I knew, what they should understand. And then we need, to the greatest extent possible, let them make decisions on their own lives. Parents should make decisions for children. And parents know best, by and large, and we need to trust them. And then individuals have to make decisions for them. Whenever the Biden administration said all the National Guard has to have the vaccine, I called my adjutant general in and I said, make sure you give every exemption possible as broadly as can be. We want them to stay with the National Guard and to give them as much flexibility as we could.
That's very laudable. Governor, one final question before I maybe kick it back over to Jeff. We have 3 doctors of law sitting in these chairs here right now.
Don't scare everybody.
A constant refrain that I hear from my constituents. There's a palpable sense, and these are Iowans with a great sense of fair play, Iowa nice, very judicious, good, decent people. There's a palpable sense that at the federal level, there now is a 2-tiered justice system. Whether it is a militant SWAT raid on a father of 6 children in the early morning for a prayerful protest at a pro-life sidewalk counseling session, ultimately vindicated at law, the case was tossed out. Or now they're going after these nice widows at Latin Mass wearing veils to church. And we see this type of surveillance and prosecution going on. All the while, we see overlooked a lot of miscreant behavior in DC, particularly if you are of a certain political party. How does your sense of justice weigh in here in balancing those scales, Governor Hutchinson?
Well, first of all, I care about it deeply because I've sworn to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America multiple times as I held office. And then even as a lawyer, as you say, I care about the rule of law in our country. As a federal prosecutor, I care about the equal application of our justice system. It's foundational for us. And we did get off track. That's not any question about it. Our justice system was politicized. The Durham report made that specific finding. Some corrections have been put into place since then, but more needs to be done. And so I've announced, you can find it on the website, asa2024.com, is my plan to reform federal law enforcement. There are 90 federal law enforcement agencies, 90, that have gun-toting authority and arrest authority. And so they have overlapping jurisdictions. I want to reform them, consolidate them, make them more transparent, and every one of them will have a charter that says you're going to respect civil liberties and you're not going to go after someone because of their political beliefs. That will be part of the charter that they have. In terms of the FBI, I've worked with them. We've prosecuted terrorism cases with them, and I have a high respect for them, but there needs to be more transparency. They need to be reformed. I'll take drug enforcement jurisdiction away from them, put it back to the DEA so that we can be more clear in their responsibilities. And so transparency, accountability, those are the key things to protect America's citizens. Put somebody in charge that knows federal law enforcement and knows what needs to be done and can reform them, as I will do.
Thank you, Governor.
Well, we are midway through this Iowa Talking Points conversation with Republican presidential candidate, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. We'll take a short break and reconvene in about 2 minutes. And welcome back to Iowa Talking Points. I'm Jeff Stein from News Talk 1540 KXEL. In today's edition of the program, which was produced on Thursday, October 26, 2023, we are in conversation with Republican presidential candidate and former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. I'm joined in the questioning by former Iowa State Representative Jon Jacobsen. Governor, let's talk about the life issue. When you were governor of Arkansas is right at the time when the Roe versus Wade decision was overturned. So let's first remind the audience what you all did in the state of Arkansas, and then we'll turn to what you would do or measures you might not do if you are president.
Well, when you talk about the life issue, you have to go back to what you actually believe. And that's what I think it's important for those running for office, is you don't try to dodge the question. And so I believe that there's life in the womb that is deserving of protection. And you start with that fundamental point, and obviously you can debate as to when the state should step in, but that's my belief. And so in Arkansas we have a conservative legislature that passed a trigger law, which says that if Roe versus Wade is reversed, then we're going to ban abortion except in the cases of the life of the mother. And when that came to my desk, I signed that law, even though I believe in the additional exceptions of rape and incest. And so that's fundamentally where I am, is that those exceptions I think are generally accepted by the American public, cases of life and rape and incest, because the last two are criminal offenses. And so that's where the state can say, we're going to let that decision be made within the family, with the medical community. And you say, well, why didn't I veto that law? Well, in Arkansas, you can override a governor's veto by a simple majority, and I want to sign pro-life laws generally, even though I had that disagreement. And so I signed 30 pro-life laws in Arkansas. We are known as the #1 pro-life state in the nation. Right now, Iowa can make their decision, and they made a different decision than Arkansas, and certainly New Hampshire makes a different decision. And so it's up to the states, and this debate is going to continue. And it'll primarily be continued at the state level, because you don't even have the Congress that can get together and elect a speaker very quickly. I doubt that they're going to be able to come together on a consensus on this very difficult issue that our families face. So it's going to take some time. So I expect it to be left to the state level. If there is a national consensus in which it comes to my desk and they have reasonable exceptions to it and with reasonable restrictions, I'll sign the law. But I don't expect that to happen. I expect that it will be left at the state level.
Should it be at the state level? And I say that because ever since the Roe decision was handed down in 1973, we heard a lot of folks in the pro-life movement say this is a states' rights issue. And so after the Dobbs decision, all of a sudden some folks changed their tune and said, well, now let's get a national law, which did not seem consistent from a legal standpoint.
That's true, and so for 40 years I've been supporting the reversal of Roe versus Wade. And the argument was that that's something that should be left to the states. That's what it was prior to the Roe decision. And that was my first reaction too. But then you read the Dobbs decision and it says that Roe versus Wade was wrongly decided, but it should be left to our elected representatives. And they didn't specify state representatives, they just said elected representatives. And so it's more of a practical response to it, that it's going to be left in the states. And as the states understand better what are the right exceptions, where are we missing the boat, and how can we better support moms going through challenging pregnancies, which is part of the life movement, which is exactly what we ought to do. Increase the availability of adoption services to make sure maternal health care is expanded. So that's what's going to happen over the next few years. At some point, I expect that we'll arrive at a national consensus, and we'll see if Congress acts, but I don't expect that to happen any too soon.
Now, you suggested that Congress might get together and pass a national law that would be pro-life and that you would sign it. What if you're the president and both chambers of Congress are controlled by Democrats and they pass a national right to abortion law?
Well, that's a good point. In fact, that's what they will do.
If they have the majority.
If they have the majority, and I will veto it. I would veto that law, absolutely. And we'll see whether they can arrive at a consensus or not. But that's what voters need to remember. It's not just about what the Republicans would decide in terms of life issue. You have to contrast that with what the Democrats want to do, which is expand abortion access without any limits, really.
I mentioned the life issue because it is one of the more fundamental moral and political issues of our respective lifetimes. But it also is the prototypical example of a divide based on partisan lines, as you just noted. What skill set do you bring to the table, presuming either divided government in terms of one or both chambers of Congress, or an American public that seems to be 50-50 on many issues. What can you bring to the table to help heal the nation, to restore the concept of being an American and move forward on some of these issues?
Well, of course, the life issue is just one issue of many that divide our country and divide our parties. And, as a governor, you're held responsible for getting things done. And if you don't get things done, you're not going to get reelected. And I promised that I was going, when I ran for office the first time as governor, I wanted to have a $100 million tax cut. I wanted to shrink or slow the growth of state government, make it more efficient, and I wanted to put computer science in every high school. Now, I don't care whether it's a Democrat or Republican, if they want to vote for that package that was important for Arkansas, I want their support and I'll reach out to them. And in Washington, D.C., it's like, if you're not on our team, we don't want your support. They magnify the divide, and that's just wrong for America. I want to change that culture, and it's hard. It's certainly harder in Washington, D.C. because of the divide that we have. But the most important characteristic of a leader is that you listen, that you actually try to see where we can reach a consensus. To me, a good example is the infrastructure bill. Infrastructure is something that we needed, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. President Trump promised an infrastructure bill. He didn't get it done. And then it goes into President Biden. And I'm not going to oppose an infrastructure bill just because it came from a Democrat idea or administration. And so as chairman of the National Governor Association, I supported that bill. And that's who I am. I want the Republican Party to succeed and to win, but whenever we can accomplish things, even with some Democrat support, we've done something good for America and we'll be rewarded for that.
President Biden has proudly said he is the most pro-labor president in American history. And here we are in 2023 with, I dare say, more labor union strikes than we have had in a long time across diverse industries. Auto workers, UPS, the healthcare workers, Hollywood, which is all leading to resolution of some of these strikes and new contracts, but higher prices. So how do you square what you will bring to the table as opposed to the mantra of the current administration?
That's an important question. And first of all, President Biden, he might claim to be pro-union, but I wouldn't call him pro-worker because his policies has eroded the paycheck of every worker in America. And his Bidenomics has not worked. And then he did the wrong thing by taking sides in the strike and intervening early on. You know that under our Labor Relations Act, it's a neutral environment in which there's a balance between the ability of the union to strike, but also the counterbalance of the management to respond to that and to have replacement workers and to negotiate in fairness. Well, here you had the president invoke himself and really take the side of the unions, and so I think he made a mistake there. They have the right to strike, they have the right to negotiate under the union contract, but it should be a fair negotiation without the heavy hand of the president coming in to tip the scales. Now, if you're looking at a national security interest, I liked whenever President Reagan said, if you're a public union, you can't strike. And that's where you draw the line. And that includes our schools. I don't like that whenever our unions and our schools hurt our students. And the same thing when President Reagan dealt with the air traffic controllers. They went on strike and he fired them and he replaced them. And so there's a balance out there, and I want to be a pro-worker president of the United States in which their wages increase, in which they have more to take home for their families. We bring more manufacturing jobs back to the United States of America, which I did even as governor, and that's, to me, pro-worker.
as opposed to pro-union.
Exactly.
Very different things. I'll bring Jon back in a moment, but let me ask, with regard to the president interjecting himself in these labor disputes, that's part of a pattern of, in essence, the government picking winners and losers. How does that play out if you are behind the desk in the Oval?
Well, you got to compete in the marketplace. And if the government taxes something, it'll decrease. If you subsidize something, it increases. And that's picking winners and losers. And, there's always a balance there. But whenever it comes to our industries, the free market system, the ability to compete on a fair marketplace is fundamental to what drives our economy in America. I was at a business earlier today in which the owners, it was a restaurant, and they were so proud of the fact that the husband, it was a husband-wife team, and the husband started back in the kitchen just as a worker and a delivery person, and now they own the restaurant. And that's not the government picking winners and losers. That's people through their work ethic making a difference and taking a risk. And risk ought to be rewarded for those job creators. And the job creators ought to be able to invest to make sure the workers benefit from that success as well.
Questioning continues now from Iowa State Representative, former Representative Jon Jacobsen.
Thanks again, Governor. And for all of us in Western Iowa, really appreciate you and Jeff Stein bringing some of us from the Western flank in. You know, sometimes we say that Des Moines' idea of Western Iowa is that it ends at the Raccoon River, and that if Iowa had a panhandle, we'd be it. But you've been out in our neck of the woods, and we appreciate that. Governor, the idea of censorship and free speech. In my work on the Oversight Committee in Iowa, we had an Iowa professional school student that was threatened with a tribunal and expulsion merely for agreeing with a tweet of President Trump's about one of his executive orders online. We had another Regent school that refused originally to admit a pro-free market enterprise group on its campus, a school that had a renowned business college. We had a third Regents University at Iowa, where a professor notably said, if you support Trump or you are pro-life, get out of my class. At the elementary and middle school level, it was such that there was militancy and curricula denigrating the conservative Christian faith of some of the children there, in complete violation of the Iowa Civil Rights Statute, which mandates total neutrality, which frankly jeopardized my taxpayers, because not only the schools but these individual administrators and teachers were potentially subject to Section 1983 discrimination suits for violations of free speech. We know Google algorithms can cook public opinion. We know Facebook outrageously censors. They did that to me, even when I was factually correct. And Twitter under Dorsey was merciless. How do we reassert free speech in this censorial society? As a businessman, Governor, corporate America now is looking for pretext to dismiss people simply because they don't go hook, line, and sinker with the DEI talking points.
Well, it is a real challenge. I spoke to some Drake Law School students this last week, and they were telling me that it's real on college campuses. Now, they were very smart and conservative and true in their convictions, so they're not swayed by it, but they literally talked about being canceled because of what they said or what they stood for or where they were going or what kind of rally they were going to hold. And so this is about higher education in our regents and our presidents using some common sense and recognize the importance of free speech and not censoring conservative speech. From a federal government standpoint and as president, first of all, the federal government ought to stay out of advocating the values in our schools or our speech content in our businesses. And you mentioned DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then you have ESG, the equity, the governance, and social engineering. This is a Department of Labor rule that said investment funds may consider ESG, in other words, the social engineering, as a factor in their investments.
Which violates fiduciary standards at law currently in statutes.
That's right. I mean, they have a fiduciary responsibility to produce revenue for their holders, their investors.
Precisely.
And then you say, well, it was just may. The federal government told them they may do this. If the federal government tells you may, that means shall. That's how it's interpreted. And so I would do away with that rule. I want the federal government to stay out. Don't push left, don't push right. Let our local communities and our local schools and our businesses determine their own investments and what they believe and what they want to say. Federal government, stay out.
Governor Hutchinson, when I was a little bitty boy, I lived in Omaha with my father and mother. GI Bill father served in the Korean War, going through dental school at Creighton University when the Cuban Missile Crisis hit. Yeah. And Omaha, with General LeMay there, Curtis LeMay running SAC, was a #1 target. Just go to the JFK Library and look at those old videos there. John F. Kennedy famously said, "Don't paint the bear into a corner." And at that juncture, we avoided missiles heading toward Omaha, even though folks in Omaha were all topping off their gas tanks several times a day. Now we have a situation in Ukraine, which begs the question, do we have the right leadership with the right savvy and the right cognition who can make prudential judgments in Ukraine? Are we in danger of overreacting, poking the Russian bear, and literally provoking Mr. Putin into a nuclear theater overreaction in Europe and, heaven forbid, the United States? And how can America now fight a two-front battle if we've got to go to the Middle East with all of our intel, depleted ammo, depleted strategic oil reserve? Have we miscalculated in Ukraine?
Well, you mentioned Ukraine, but the same question can be asked in Israel, and I'm fully supportive of Israel. But you could make the argument that we're going to poke Iran so much that you're going to put them in a corner, that they're going to come out and we're going to wind up in a confrontation with them. So these are very serious issues. So. Absolutely. But it is important whenever you have Russia as the aggressor nation taking over another sovereign country, part of it, invading them, and those free people of Ukraine stand up and say, no, we're going to fight for our freedom. What side should America be on? America should always be on the side of the oppressed and not the oppressor. And so to me, it's a clear call. My dad served in World War II. And I know that those that were in the European theater, they know very well the threat of a European conflict. And if we can stop it in Ukraine, then that saves our lives, and Americans don't have to be engaged from a personal troop standpoint. And so I think it is important. We always measure how much. We have to be careful, but we shouldn't let Russia dictate what our response is and our level of support for Ukraine. Neither should we let Iran dictate our level of support for Israel. Israel is entitled a necessity to go after Hamas. And those who call for a ceasefire whenever you've had 1,300 of your civilians that were murdered brutally by a terrorist group that needs to be destroyed, Israel is rightfully saying we're going to go after them, and the United States should be supporting. Now you got to think of the big picture and what happens afterwards. Whenever Israel goes into the Gaza Strip, whenever they go after Hamas, they destroy the buildings there. You have the civilians that leave. Then what happens? And that is what you've got to think through now. Now, there's a lot of people giving a lot of thought to that, and Israel has to be a part of that conversation. I still believe in the two-state solution, that there has to be a home for Palestinians. Clearly, the Arab world does not want them going back into Egypt or Jordan. They resist that, and so there has to be a Palestinian home, but there also should be one without terrorist domination. And to me, that is the strategic objective that we have to strive for, and that should be a fundamental principle as we make decisions.
Do you think the Biden administration, Governor, made a fundamental miscalculation in scuttling the Minsk Accords that President Zelensky actually ran on ratifying, that the Russians and Zelensky were about to sit down and ink the Minsk Accords when those were scuttled by our foreign policy team under the Biden administration?
Sure. I mean, President Biden has made a number of mistakes that showed weakness. And that's one of them that you speak of. Another one is the weakness in coming out of Afghanistan that empowered Russia, saying this is a good time, and China toward Taiwan. He obviously made a mistake, and when you're putting $6 billion in Iran's hand, when you know that they're supporting Hezbollah and Hamas and helping to coordinate and approve those attacks on Israel. And so that weakness, that naivete is not good whenever you're dealing with a terrorist organization that does not regard life.
A football analogy, if I can close out this segment here. Arkansas and Iowa share some commonalities. Hayden Fry, for one. Hayden Fry, who helped break the color barrier, integrating football, and was doing some of that in his early Arkansas days before matriculating to Texas and then later to Iowa. And of course, as a young boy, one of the first great matchups between number 1 and 2 wasn't Nebraska-Oklahoma on Thanksgiving of '71. It was Texas and Arkansas in 1969. I remember because President Nixon flew in to the game, Darrell Royal coaching the Longhorns, Frank Broyles coaching Arkansas. I admire you for having the guts to come into Iowa, Governor, and sticking through it. And it's a slog through Iowa, but you're plowing through, you're meeting the people. This is how you get your ticket punch in Iowa: win, place, and show. Fast forward to today, we have an Iowa offense. We love our Hawkeyes, but some saying that punting on third down may be our best offensive play under offensive coordinator Ferentz. You have a story about not punting on third down. Is that emblematic of you not punting on third down and getting out of the race prematurely?
Well, a great way to phrase it, and of course that 1969 game, I'll never forget. I wasn't there, I watched it, but it was a historic game. And you had President Nixon there. You had our Congressman John Paul Hammersmith there, and you had Governor Rockefeller. There's a great picture of all of them sitting there. Regretfully, Arkansas lost that game.
15-14, two-point conversion.
And of course, there's legendary Coach Frank Broyles, who really redefined sports in Arkansas. But he did have a habit early in his career, particularly, of punting on third down. And his thinking was, well, that gives me an extra down to if we fumble the ball. Well, I've made that analogy as head of the DEA that you don't punt on third down whenever you're looking at the challenges that we face with fentanyl. You've got to stick after it because it impacts lives. In the political arena, you know, there are those that say, well, Donald Trump is so high, you know, they have all these debate criteria. I made the first debate, I didn't make the second debate. Well, you ought to just withdraw from the race. Well, that to me is like punting on third down. And so I believe in Iowa. And I want Iowa to have to be able to make the decision as to, you know, who's going to have a ticket out of here, as you say, to go to New Hampshire and on the campaign. I trust Iowa. I want to be able to be in the communities. I want to communicate what I believe. And I encourage everybody to just look at the track record. And so I'm not punting on third down. I'm here, I'm working hard, and they're going to continue to do so.
Nice response.
Well, we are close to the end of our time, Governor, so we'll give you the last 2 minutes to make your case directly to the Iowa voters.
Thank you, and to the Iowa voters, what an honor it is to be in your state and your communities. And I love the comparisons of Arkansas and Iowa. I grew up, of course, in Arkansas, farm community. It's a farm state. It is a state of community and values, and that's what I see in Iowa. And I'm proud of the fact that I went to 4-H. I was a 4-H member, as I've said, and I understand Iowa agriculture. We need a president that understands the importance of having a farm bill that's passed on time. And it's also important to me about my family, which I haven't mentioned. I have a wonderful bride, Susan, of 50 years, and Susan has been in Iowa. She loves it just as much. We have 4 children. We have 7 grandchildren. And I have the leadership that's needed for being President of the United States. And I'm here because I trust Iowa. I'm going to be working with you. And one thing's been told to me by Iowans, and that is, after I have a conversation with them, they say, Asa, you're running for President of the United States and you seem normal. And to me, that is the highest compliment I can have. And I think we need normalcy in the White House. Not normal in objectives or fighting spirit, but normal reflecting the character of our great country. And we need to have someone that can accomplish extraordinary things for our country. That's the history of America. That's the leader that I want to be. And that's what I hope that Iowa sees in me as I campaign in your communities. Thank you.
And that brings to a close this edition of Iowa Talking Points, featuring a conversation with Republican presidential candidate and former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. Learn more at the campaign website, asa2024.com. Today's program was produced on Thursday, October 26, 2023, within Studio 5 at Mudd Advertising in Cedar Falls. Thanks to my colleague, panelist, former Iowa State Representative Jon Jacobsen for his participation. You can go to iowatalkingpoints.com for more information on our future events, which will be live streamed and available via video on demand. Again, all of it at iowatalkingpoints.com. We'll air these as well on News Talk 1540 KXEL. I'm Jeff Stein. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Iowa Talking Points.